The Debt That Ruined Everything: How I Learned to Stop Enabling My Manipulative Uncle. It all started with a simple call from my Uncle Rick, a call that came completely out of the blue. I'd barely heard from him in months, but there he was, asking for help. He was in a rough spot, as usual, and he needed $7,000 to get back on his feet. Rick wasn't a stranger to hard times. Over the years, I'd seen him bounce back from one setback after another. He had this charm about him, a way of spinning a story, making everything seem like it was just one more hurdle to overcome. And every time, he'd make it sound so convincing, so hopeful. I had always admired how he managed to pull through. But this time was different. The urgency in his voice felt off. Still, family is family, right? After everything Rick had done for me, helping raise me after my father passed away, showing up when I needed him most, how could I say no? I didn't think twice. I told myself it was just a loan, something temporary. He'd pay me back once things settled. It's what families do for each other. As soon as I agreed, I felt a knot in my stomach. Maybe it was the size of the amount, maybe it was the vague details of the so-called business opportunity he had. But I brushed it off. Rick had always pulled through before. Maybe he just needed a little push, a little financial help to get back on track. I thought I could trust him. I thought I was doing the right thing. But what happened next? That's when everything began to unravel. That's when I realized the mistake I had just made. I had no idea what was coming, and I had no idea just how much trust would be broken in the weeks to follow. 2 weeks passed, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had overreacted. Rick had sent the first installment of the loan, $200, just like he said he would. He even called a couple of times, updating me on some progress with his business deal. Maybe I was wrong to feel so uneasy at first. Maybe this was just how things worked out sometimes. But then, one morning, everything shifted. It started with a notification. Rick had posted something new on Facebook. I opened the app without thinking, scrolling absent-mindedly through my feed. Then I froze. There he was. Rick, smiling wide, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. He was dressed in a brand new suit, the kind that costs more than most people's rent, and there was a lavish dinner spread out in front of him, wine glasses sparkling, a meal I couldn't even pronounce. The caption read, "Living the dream, #blessed." I couldn't believe my eyes. It was supposed to be a business trip to Cincinnati. He had asked me for $7,000 so he could secure a deal, a sure thing. But there he was, living it up in Paris like it was just another vacation. A rush of emotions hit me all at once: confusion, anger, betrayal. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. How could he do this? How could he take my money, the money I had been saving for years, and use it to fund a vacation to Europe? The phone buzzed in my hand. It was Sophie, my sister. "Chris, did you see Rick's Facebook post?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "He's in Paris." The guy was supposed to be in Cincinnati for a meeting. I don't know, something doesn't feel right. I didn't even know what to say. It was all clicking now, the vague details of the business deal, the sudden need for a loan, the promise that everything would be paid back in 6 months. And now this. It wasn't just a slip-up. It was a full-on lie. I knew I needed answers. I texted Rick immediately, explained the Paris photos. 3 hours passed, and the response finally came. "Don't worry about it, kid. You'll survive. It's just money." Just money? My stomach turned. How could he be so casual? How could he throw away the trust one had placed in him? I'd been so sure this would work out. But now, all I could see was how far he'd gone to deceive me. Before I share what happened next, the moment that completely changed everything, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight to get your trust back after being lied to, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. I didn't respond to Rick's message. Instead, I spent the rest of the evening staring at those pictures on Facebook, the ones of him laughing, enjoying a meal in front of the Eiffel Tower. The man who had promised me he was turning his life around was living a lie. I could feel it in my gut. And I knew, deep down, this was just the beginning. I texted Rick again, demanding an explanation. I had to hear it from him. I needed to understand why he thought he could get away with this. His response was almost casual, as if nothing had changed. "Don't worry, kid. You'll survive. It's just money." Just money? I stared at the message, each word sinking deeper into me like a nail in a coffin. My heart felt heavy. I had worked so hard for that money, saved it, sacrificed for it. And here he was, acting as if it was just pocket change, something that didn't matter. It felt like a punch in the gut, a slap in the face. The trust one had for Rick was shattered in that moment. All those memories of him being there for me when I needed him, all the times he told me he was family, that we were family, they all started to fade. How could I have been so blind? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything, about the man I thought I knew, about the times he had been there for me, about the promises he had made. I started scrolling through old family photos, trying to make sense of it all. There was the picture from my high school graduation, Rick standing next to me, grinning like the proud uncle he always pretended to be. Then there was the family reunion from a few years ago, where he had helped me with my broken car, even when he'd never been the best with tools. But now, all I saw was a stranger. A man who had been lying to me all along, a man who thought he could take advantage of my trust without facing the consequences. I wasn't foolish, though. I had made him sign a contract. There was a paper trail, something concrete to protect me. But the truth was, even a signed contract couldn't fix the damage to my heart. The trust was gone. I didn't have to think twice. I knew what I had to do. I blocked him. Everywhere. Phone, email, social media, gone. He was out of my life, at least for now. The next day, I went to work and made sure that my security team knew exactly who Rick was. I wasn't going to let him show up uninvited again. No more surprises. No more lies. It was over. I needed to talk to someone, so I called Sophie. She was furious, just like me, but I could hear the concern in her voice too. "Chris, you have to take action," she said. "This isn't just about the money. It's about what he did to you. You can't just let this slide." She was right. I had to do more than just block him. I had to make sure he faced the consequences for what he'd done. But what was I supposed to do? I wasn't about to chase him down, but I couldn't just let him keep pulling these scams on people, on our family. I thought about it for a while and decided it was time to get legal. I couldn't let this happen again. And so, I started making plans. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm. I was determined. I knew this wasn't the end, not yet. But it was the beginning of something new for me, something I had to do for my own peace of mind. The closure I had hoped for wasn't in Rick's apology, which I knew I would never get. It wasn't in the money, either. It was in the quiet finality of blocking him from my life. It was a small act, but it was the most powerful one I could make. And I was done. Rick's calls didn't stop. Every morning, I'd wake up to a new voicemail or a string of text messages. Some were desperate, some were filled with guilt, others still tried to manipulate me into responding. But I ignored them all. I wasn't going to let him reel me back in. Then came the messages from family. Everyone was worried about Rick. My Aunt Sarah called me one evening, her voice full of concern. "Chris, you've got to talk to him. He's in a bad place. He's losing everything, and he's really struggling. Please, just give him a chance." I could hear the desperation in her voice, but it didn't move me. I had already heard every excuse, every story from Rick over the years. This time, I wasn't buying it. I had learned my lesson. It wasn't just about the $7,000 anymore, it was about taking control and making sure Rick faced the consequences of his actions. So, I played it smart. I didn't rush to call Rick back. Instead, I started documenting everything. I saved all the messages, the screenshots of his lavish posts on Facebook, and even the text messages where he was asking for more money. I made copies of the contract we had signed and kept track of every payment he had made. I knew that one day, I'd need this evidence to hold him accountable. I didn't feel the need to confront him right away. Instead, I took a step back. Rick had been so quick to manipulate me before, but this time, I wasn't going to fall into his trap. I was calm. I was collected. I was building my case. Mia, my wife, was a huge support during this time. She was the one who helped me organize everything, who kept me grounded when I felt the urge to rush into action. Together, we created a paper trail. Every transaction, every message, every ridiculous post of Rick living it up in Europe, all of it was being carefully recorded. I know this isn't easy, Mia said one night as we went through the documentation. But we're doing the right thing. You're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting the rest of the family from falling for his tricks. She was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure that Rick couldn't get away with using our family for his own selfish gains. If I didn't act now, who knew how many others he'd take advantage of? The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that this had to be dealt with once and for all. I didn't reach out to Rick. I didn't let him see how much he'd hurt me. I just kept gathering evidence. And when the time was right, I'd make sure everyone knew exactly who Rick really was. The game had changed. It wasn't about helping Rick anymore, it was about making sure that he faced the consequences for what he'd done. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. And I knew that in the end, Rick's manipulation wouldn't work on me. It was only a matter of time before everything caught up with him. 3 months passed, and I thought I was done with Rick. I had moved on, built my life back up, and left everything he had done behind me. But just when I thought I could finally breathe, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised. I'd known it was coming. I just didn't know when. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, Rick. But this time, he was different. His usual cocky smile was gone, replaced by a look I hadn't seen before, desperation. His clothes were disheveled, his face drawn. He was no longer the confident man who had always tried to convince me everything would be fine. Now, I could see the weight of his lies pressing down on him. "Chris," he said, his voice shaky. "I need your help. Things have gotten out of control, and I don't know what to do anymore." I stood there for a moment, just looking at him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I just felt calm. I had prepared for this moment for months. And now, it was finally here. I sent everything, I said quietly, my gaze steady. The posts, the contract, the texts. Everyone knows what you did. Rick's face drained of color. He took a step back, his eyes wide in shock. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The confidence he once had was gone, replaced by pure panic. He was drowning in the truth of his own actions. For a second, I thought he might try to manipulate me again, make some last-ditch effort to win me over. But he didn't. He just stood there, unable to move, unable to speak. The weight of everything he had done was finally catching up with him. I didn't have to say anything else. The silence between us spoke louder than any words I could have spoken. It was the silence of inevitability, the silence of a man realizing that the lies he had spun were no longer going to save him. Rick turned around, his shoulders slumped, his head hanging low. His world, the one he had carefully constructed with deceit and manipulation, was falling apart around him. For the first time, I saw him not as the person I had once trusted, but as a broken man who had lost everything. He walked away slowly, his steps heavy with defeat. I watched him leave, feeling no satisfaction, no triumph, just the quiet knowledge that justice had been done. Rick had made his choices, and now he would have to live with the consequences. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The chapter was finally closed. And as I stood there, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. It was over. And this time, it was done for good.